Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is to walk you through an example of what we would normally do in this session, which is to look at one way of taking a conversation about a system or something which needs to be modeled and representing it so that we can later turn it into a database or use it in our Rails application. I'm going to use draw.io because normally I would have a whiteboard, and that's not really going to work here, apart from possibly for comedy value. Draw.io is pretty good, and it has all kinds of different flowchart shapes and stuff. I'm just going to stick in the root folder for now. You can have a go at this as well if you want. It's quite a good way of generating things to share them. I used to use Visio, but this is free. So let's go ahead and call that something like this. Okay. We had the idea of car or vehicle hire, which I think it was Matt said. I can't change the window to check. It's quite a good idea anyway. It is a model that sort of stands up quite well to what we're sort of thinking of doing. So what I would probably do first is to think about the types of entities or the types of things, or if you remember when we talked about object orientation, the type of objects that you might have, and they're probably things like people, and they're probably things like vehicles, which I can't spell. And as you start to think about it a little bit more, you'll need to know who hired what, perhaps their contracts. That's not a great name, we can change it later. So we're interested in who has hired what the terms of that hire were. We're probably going to need some sort of pricing stuff. And I'm going to stop there because I want to keep this fairly simple, because that will quickly get more complicated as we go on. So maybe the next thing you could do is have a think about what sort of bits of information you'd keep for each of those. You're going to have an ID, you're going to have a name, maybe you'll have an address, maybe you have an email, maybe you have a phone number, right? There's a lot more that you could, I don't want an arrow, bigger list. There's a lot more detail you could go into there. But I would suggest for this exercise to keep it fairly simple, so we'll ignore things like address would normally live in another table to avoid duplication. You have to think about driving licenses and things like that as well. We'll ignore those just for now. Just going to put some more lists out here. Where you go? Nope, not you. You. Okay, great. Vehicles, so we'd have something like the type. Again, that would probably end up being a lookup against another table. So it could be a car, it could be a bike, it could be a van. It might have a name. It might have a registration. Let's keep it simple like that, perhaps. When we talk about the contracts, who, what, when. So that's what that kind of piece of information is going to consist of. It goes without saying that all of these will also have some kind of identifier, right? So here, I'm gonna actually simplify this. I'm gonna take that one. I'm gonna delete it, and we're gonna say here we have an hourly rental price. Okay. So very quickly, we've picked out the three main sort of pieces of information, and we've kind of figured out what they're composed of. Those objects are composed of these elements. I'm having a real problem with these arrows here. And what we could then start to do is actually think about how that might look in a database. So let's say this was customer. Let's give them better names now. So we have, let's try and do this in a sort of Rails sense. Actually formally put this down. There we go. Copy that over here. Excuse me. Remember, we got our pluraling, right? This is Rails, isn't it? So that's just going to be ID. Name. Price per hour. There we go. This one, though, is a bit special, isn't it? So this is our, let's call it rental. I guess that makes more sense than contracts. We've got our ID. Our customer. If I put in the hire date and the return date, we could calculate how long they had it out for. We might add that as an explicit field as well. Various options. So that gives us a very simple kind of look at how that might be. We can shift these around a little bit and put them maybe there. And much to the delight now of this, I can put some arrows in. Just have to go kind of over there, which is irritating. I hate it when lines cross over, but you get the point that we can kind of link those two together. I can actually solve the fact they're crossed over by putting him down there. Length we go to. Join it on there. There you go. That's probably how you do it. There's more that could go into there. We could make it a lot more complicated as we model it out. And that would be subject to whether or not your application really needs it. So, for instance, we may not need type at all if we don't care. But equally, we might want to go, well, you know what, that's actually kind of important. We have a vehicle type. Come on. And that vehicle type would have a name. It's probably all it would have, in fact. And that would allow us to have, say, vans, cars, different kinds of things. And more importantly, having an actual sort of lookup for the type would make it easier for us to report on them later on, potentially. So, I'll probably key there. Tell us what that was. And it might be that we then say, well, actually, if we're having a type, they're going to cost different amounts. And we'll move that over there. There is one more thing that I want to show you on here. This is very much a quick and cut down version of what I would do, because I'm quite keen for you guys to have a go at the same thing. Really, this is the hard part, and if we get a chance to do it, maybe on a live Q&A we could brainstorm an example, because it's they're figuring out of, well, I'm thinking about a vehicle hire business, so the objects are what? There's the people that hire things, there's the things that they hire, and there's the sort of description of how long they hired that for. This is a nice simple example where you can get very carried away with these. So if you look at, say, a shop, it's possible to end up with hundreds of objects. There is one more thing that you need to add here, though, which is that you need to make a note of what types of data these are. So this is probably something like that. I'm going to probably say that's something like that. You want to have kind of sensible limits. You can. This is one of those get into a debate over. You can make it an integer, but you might want to store the +44, +34, whatever it is on the front country code. You might say it's just 15 characters. You might not store the 0. You might store it as 7797 because you know there's either a 0 or a country code on the front. Right? Can vary wildly. Name of the vehicle. 100. Registration. Something like that. And so on and so on. Like here, price per hour. As I've said to you before, I would always do pence and multiply it just to avoid rounding errors. So this one, 50. They're probably going to be quite short, actually. Obviously, here you've got your date times. Just make him a little bit bigger. No, not draw an arrow on him. So there you have it. I'll share this with you now. But what we would like you to do off the back of this is to pick another example of your own. Okay, so that might be similar to this one. Might be libraries, video hire, any kind of shop, booking some kind of service like a hairdresser. That kind of thing is generally a good example, but you're not strictly limited to those. Pick an example, make a list of what you think the objects are, draft out what you think the database structure would look like, and then create that database in MySQL using scripts. And what we will do is we'll arrange a date and time to have an online session, perhaps with at least me and Tiago and you guys, to run through any questions that you have as a